Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time we got a question from Siberian Dream, who asked, "Hey Thor, you criticize Disney Star Wars all the time, which I understand. There's a lot to criticize, but what are your thoughts on some of the flaws of the prequels? One in particular that stands out to me is that after fighting a long battle to try and destroy Darth Vader, Obi-Wan then just leaves him on the lava shores of Mustafar. I find that behavior unbecoming of a Jedi to just abandon the mission objective at the end like that, failing to destroy your enemy, and of course leaving a former friend to burn in severe agony instead of relieving it. Obi-Wan could have easily force-pushed Anakin into the lava or thrown his lightsaber at him to behead him. In the novel, it makes more sense as there was a cliff separating them, and the Emperor was rapidly approaching, so Obi-Wan felt that he didn't have time to linger around. There's no such problems in the movie, but even then, the novel isn't flawless as Obi-Wan privately muses that he's not feeling very merciful, which I also think is antithetical to a Jedi, as mercy and compassion is at the foundation of their order, even in the darkest times. I know I'm not alone in how jarring I find the scene. I think something Irvin Kershner said rings true, that George Lucas just doesn't understand how to write other human beings at all. What do you think of this? And, well, I do agree that maybe George Lucas is not the greatest writer of all time. He certainly has one heck of an imagination, and he can come up with some pretty incredible ideas for stories, but no, maybe not the best writer, or maybe doesn't have the knack for writing the most compelling dialogue ever. He does seem to struggle in that department. He doesn't always seem to completely understand human emotions when he's writing. Either way, when it comes to Obi-Wan and Anakin or Vader at the end of their duel in Revenge of the Sith, or how Obi-Wan handles the whole situation after the fact, that he hacks Anakin up and then kind of watches him burn a little bit and screaming in pain, but doesn't finish him off. Well, we of course have to keep the prequel problem in mind here, and by that I don't necessarily mean a problem with the Star Wars prequels, I mean an inherent problem or concern anytime you make a prequel, which is that you have limitations or boundaries. You obviously have to have your story aligned with what comes later on, and that has already been established. And in this case, that means somehow, or for some reason, Obi-Wan has to win the fight, taking Anakin's lightsaber in the process to give to Luke later on, and Vader has to live and live with these terrible wounds that ends up getting him put in the suit. And sure, there's actually a lot of ways that could have been done. You bring up the novelization where it was handled differently, where he couldn't get to him, Obi-Wan couldn't get to Vader. And so, yeah, there were a lot of ways that Obi-Wan could have defeated Vader and truly thought he had killed him and been able to take the saber. Maybe Vader is disarmed, quite literally, by Obi-Wan, and then he falls into some sort of lava pit or something like that. And Obi-Wan figures he must have died, but he didn't. And then he takes the saber from Anakin's severed arm and calls it a day. But for better or worse, the way Lucas has it plays out allows these two to, in a sense, say their goodbyes, to talk to each other after the fact. And you can certainly argue it has more emotional impact this way, more than it would if it just ended with Anakin falling into a pit or something. This way we have Obi-Wan calling Anakin his brother, telling him he loved him and all of that, and then Anakin, or again Vader, screaming back that he hates him. You don't get all that, again, for better or worse, you can argue, if Anakin simply falls into a pit and is presumed dead. That said, I do agree that the way it does end causes some potential issues or makes you wonder what exactly is Obi-Wan thinking here. As you pointed out, the novel says that Obi-Wan knew Palpatine was approaching, and because they were separated, he and Anakin were separated, he ends up kind of fleeing. But if that is the case in the movie, if say somehow, keeping in mind Palpatine ain't the easiest to sense after remaining hidden under the Jedi's noses for years, but if Obi-Wan senses or some way knows Palpatine is coming, it means that he then also knows that Yoda has been defeated, that Yoda failed to take out Palpatine, which makes the situation even more dire, and you would really think that Obi-Wan, would want to rob Palpatine of his powerful apprentice and to maybe give Anakin a little shove into the lava to make sure he dies. And so, assuming Kenobi cannot sense Palpatine is coming, which nothing in the film suggests he knows this, or that Lucas was trying to imply he somehow knew it, it does mean that Kenobi likely thought he was leaving Anakin for dead, and that yes, he was leaving him there to suffer, which is a very un-Jedi-like thing to do. I certainly agree with that. But I don't know if that was it as much as not being able to bring himself to finish Anakin off was the problem for Obi-Wan. That he could not bring himself to go and behead him or push him into the lava or stab him in the chest to finish it. Not that that always works in Star Wars, of course. Though it is interesting to note that in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan does say this to Luke.
To protect you both from the Emperor, you were hidden from your father when you were born.
And if they did indeed hide Luke and Leia from Vader right after they were born, as we do see at the end of Revenge of the Sith, well, that kind of implies that Obi-Wan knew Anakin or knew Vader had survived. I mean, why would you hide them from Vader if you thought you had just killed Vader? Though, yes, hiding them from the Emperor still makes sense, but that's not what Kenobi says. He does specifically say hid them from their father. Though I do suppose this could be another truth from a certain point of view, that even if they, Kenobi and Yoda, didn't realize it at the time, they were still hiding the twins from Vader too. He just didn't want to go into the details at the time. Obi-Wan didn't want to tell him about how he had hacked apart his father and left him for dead on a lava shore, that he was going to let him suffer and die that way. It's also possible, if not likely, this is one of those aforementioned kind of prequel problems where sometimes when you tell the beginning of a story second after the ending, you don't always have it align perfectly, and they weren't really thinking about that line from Obi-Wan to Luke in Return of the Jedi, and how it kind of contradicts the end of Revenge of the Sith. Furthermore, if we want to go by what the Kenobi series establishes, well, there we learn that Obi-Wan didn't know that Anakin or Vader had survived. He doesn't know the truth until Reva tells him after like 10 years of believing he had killed Anakin or killed Vader. Which then means Obi-Wan simply did assume Anakin was going to die when he left him like that. Which I do think makes the most sense. I think, again, it wasn't meant to be cruel or intended to be, even though leaving him there like that was indeed kind of cruel. Not that Anakin hadn't done some stuff to maybe deserve it, but I fully believe Kenobi simply could not bring himself to kill his brother that he loved, that it's easier to let him die than to be the one to finish him off. Though, as a Jedi, I do believe he should have done what he must and finished the job. Which then brings us back to the aforementioned Kenobi series, where in it Kenobi again defeats Darth Vader and walks away from him. He again lets him live. Though this time he does it knowing with certainty there is a Star Destroyer in orbit after all, and Vader isn't really that hurt. But he knows that Darth Vader is going to survive and get off planet to live to kill another day. And Kenobi also lets him live after being fully convinced now that his brother that he once loved is indeed, for all intents and purposes, is dead and gone. That he is more machine now than man, and also after once again saying he would do what he must. And I know some will make the argument that Kenobi letting Vader live is mercy or compassion, and that is the Jedi way, and yes, those things are the Jedi way, don't get me wrong. Problem is, in this case, showing mercy and compassion to Vader, who without question is going to visit pain and death upon others, many other people across the galaxy, that is not the Jedi way. This is a case where you really have to do what you must, and rid the galaxy of one of the greatest evils it has ever seen, not simply walk away from it. That is not mercy. That is not him, Kenobi, thinking he is going to die again, like he thought on Mustafar. Instead, it is him condemning the galaxy to evil because of his inability to act as he knew he should. But anyway, the Kenobi series also faces the prequel problem. It again pits these two against each other while having to align with A New Hope and them obviously both needing to survive to be in that movie. And instead of getting clever with this confrontation, or as was suggested before, instead of Kenobi winning by pushing Vader into a pit or something like that and thinking he had killed him, though I don't think we needed this rematch of the century in the first place, but that is besides the point now, we have gotten it. But instead of going with Obi-Wan really thinking he had killed Vader this time, or maybe vice versa, Vader thinking he killed Kenobi or leaving him for dead this time, which I think if you're going to do this, if you're going to have them fight again, it makes the most sense. Though that wouldn't align with the whole, when I left you, I was but the learner, now I am the master line from A New Hope that Vader says to Kenobi, implying when they last saw each other, Vader was not a master, that Vader had not defeated Kenobi in the meantime. But they did it the way they did because, like George Lucas before them, they wanted these two to be able to talk to each other after the fight for dramatic effect. So, yeah, in closing here, George Lucas, no, maybe not the greatest writer of all time. There are some problems between the prequels and the original trilogy, nothing that I would say is major or that couldn't be explained some way, somehow. And in this case, I really don't have a problem with Kenobi leaving Anakin like that, leaving him like he did the first time on Mustafar in Revenge of the Sith. I do have a big problem with the Kenobi series. But I do think he was pretty sure, he was positive he was going to die, that Anakin was going to die on Mustafar, that Palpatine was not going to come for him and put him in a suit and he'd become this terror that is a menace across the galaxy. I just think this was a case of him not being able to finish off his brother. And yeah, maybe he did down deep, maybe he thought he deserved to suffer just a little bit for what he had done, even if that isn't a very Jedi-like thing to think. Well, that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below. Do you have an issue with the way the battle on Mustafar, the Battle of the Heroes, ended in Revenge of the Sith? Do you think Kenobi should have just killed Anakin? Do you think he thought he was dead? Do you think he thought he was going to live? Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video, but whatever the case may be, leave those questions or comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.